Welcome to What Works for Women at Work. I'm your host, Evelyn Akselrod, and this season, I'm talking to bold and accomplished women who are ready to spill the secrets to their incredible success. Come join me and unlock the doors to your leadership breakthrough. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. I am here today with Lisa Lang, an interesting professional who have, spent time from everything from the army to the city to now universities, and you're going to be so interested in hearing from her. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we here at What Works for Women at Work really need to know, how we can do communication better. Communication is a critical skill for all of us, and so who better to learn it from than somebody in law who's negotiating and speaking all the time. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, whenever I talk about my background, it's really a pretty non-traditional path to get where I am today. And I initially went to school to be a teacher, then thought I wanted to go into the law. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to undertake law school right away. And so I went into the Army and I became a military paralegal. And I was very happy doing that. And then I got out and I, for a time, was a civilian paralegal, but then I went into private practice at a law firm after going to law school at night. And then, as you said, I went from working in from the law firm, moving into state government. And after moving around a bit within state government and specializing in education, I eventually found myself where I am today, which is in higher education. And I am currently serving as Vice President and General Counsel for Ohio Northern University in Ada, Ohio.
Incredible journey you've had so far. And I'm sure we can learn so much from you, but when we chatted, communication really seemed to stand out for you. Why is that important to you?
Well, what's so funny is that I'm sitting here speaking to you about it today because when I started my career, in large part, it went the way that it did as a result of my discomfort with communication. So I learned over time, I didn't have to have all the answers and I didn't have to be perfect. But with every role that I took, I learned more about what I needed to do to be heard. And sometimes that learning process involved doing things that probably did not serve me. And then there were other times, when I started to find more of my voice and I figured out how to use that voice. But even today, I still find myself on occasion, I don't know if second guessing or doubting, but just always being so very aware of the importance of communication. And sometimes I do it well. And then there was other times when I thought, there's still plenty for me to learn. But I would just encourage anybody to accept the fact that we're not always going to be perfect, and we can learn who we are and be who we are and still be effective. And that learning process for me took literally decades.
Yeah, and it sounds like coming to a place of acceptance that we're human. Yes. and enjoy the fact that we're human and don't need to be perfect. And yesterday isn't the same as today. And so you're going to show up a little bit differently depending on what's happening in your life. And so we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace with that. And so important you're talking about this, because I was speaking to a colleague the other day and they were saying even Tony Robbins has sort of a thing that he does before he comes out on stage. And Tony Robbins is the guru of communication and public speaking, and even he has to do this ramp up to put himself in that state to be able to serve people. So Tell us a little bit more as you think on communication, especially with women in the workplace.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and so I talked about the fact that communication has played a huge part in my own career trajectory and how I made the decisions that I made. And part of the reason I decided not to go into education and to be a teacher and to not immediately go to law school was because I was painfully shy in high school. And the thought of getting in front of people, it was painful. And I had a very bad experience in high school debate where I froze. And to this day, I don't even remember what happened or what I said because it was such a traumatizing experience for me. And it did take some time for me to realize that it didn't matter what career path I took. Communication was something that I was always going to need to do, and I needed to learn how to do it. And so when I went into the military, I found myself, I was a military paralegal and I was in the JAG Corps, and very often I found myself with a unit that didn't have the lawyer. And they would be at some remote location where I was not at. And I found myself in rooms with commanders. And obviously I couldn't give legal advice, but I could pass along information that I had discussed with the attorney that I was supporting and helping. And it was the first time where I felt capable and confident of my ability to be able to step into that room and to be able to provide information to leaders that were at a level that was much higher than what I was. And that time in the military really caused me to reassess what I felt my abilities were or were not. And I don't think everybody just comes in one day and knows how to do it. You have to learn over time. You need to know yourself. You need to know how you tick, what circumstances, environment you function in best, and to try and be able to create those situations and have some confidence. And it was because of that that I decided that I would go to law school. And it was also from the JAG officers that I worked with that were very supportive and really encouraging. And so with every positive interaction I had, the more my confidence grew and I felt more and more capable, and it helped propel me forward because of the confidence I was developing and my ability to step up into a room and to be able to speak and be heard.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm hearing a bit of a formula emerging here in terms of you need to accept yourself, knowing that you're not going to be perfect the first time you do something. You're not going to feel confident the first time you do something because confidence actually is a result of the actions that you're taking. And so you're building confidence like a muscle over every action that you step up and challenge yourself with. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And that's what I've learned. And here's the other thing I also learned. Part of that confidence comes from actually having experiences that are not as positive sometimes.
Mhm.
Because what you realize once you've had that experience that is not as positive, you begin to realize, well, how bad was it? And so you get the confidence of not only knowing, yes, I can be successful, and if I'm not successful, that experience is not going to make or break me moving forward. And in fact, sometimes it's good because it helps you be able to do better next time. But having those experiences and really not realizing that they're really not as bad as you envisioned them to be was actually sometimes even more constructive and helped propel me forward, because I realized making mistakes was human, and it was okay.
And you're taking that's what you're showing us. Like that learning from failure that everyone fears
Right.
is so critical for us. And
Yeah,
so we can't run away from the opportunities that we might fail at because you're going to lose the learnings from it, right? So
absolutely.
incredible insights. Now, something that struck me when you were sharing was how powerful it was for you to share information with higher ups in the army, generals, and so on. Like, and it was critical, the information that you had to share with them. And that's oftentimes the way I look at communication is it's not about me, it's about the information or the sharing to support somebody else.
Absolutely.
Can you reflect on that and talk a little bit more about that, especially when you're presenting cases and so on?
Right. And and that's the interesting thing too, in terms of when you're talking about communication, and you're talking about communication in the area in which I work, which is in the legal field. During a period of time, it was I was either a paralegal supporting an attorney, or I was a junior associate supporting a partner, or now it could be speaking to a board and supporting a president. So, yeah, it's knowing and understanding for whom you're speaking and to whom you're speaking, and being able to have confidence in the information you're providing, being able to say you don't know when you don't know, and watching the cues in the room. Because I have communicated with different audiences, with a variety of different levels of understanding in terms of what I was talking about. And so every situation is so unique, because you have to know who it is that you're speaking for and to whom it is you are speaking to. And there's so much that needs to go into it. And, when I was in the military and I was speaking with military leaders without my attorney present, I didn't really rehearse it. But what I found in the future, for instance, if I was presenting to a board on behalf of my president, what I began to find very useful was to not just shoot from the hip, or just go in cold and do the best that I could do. What I found very helpful was to have a conversation, for instance, with my president, because my president knows her board, and she knows what information they are expecting, and she also knows how they want that information delivered. And when I would talk with her and practice with her prior to that presentation, what she would help me to be careful of, for instance, is, as a lawyer, I'm used to speaking using certain words that are not always words that people are immediately familiar with. We also talked about tone. And something my most recent president taught me, and I've seen her do it, is I don't have to go in a room and be loud. And what I have noticed is sometimes if you go in and you start lower, all of a sudden the attention becomes more focused on you, because they're straining to hear what you have to say. So, and part of what I had to learn when I was working with these presidents and how they were guiding with me on how to speak with the board is I'd also been a litigator, and I was used to being in court, and I was used to arguing with an opposing counsel for a judge. And the way I approached that communication had to be completely different than the communication that I was engaged in when I was speaking to a board on behalf of a president. And I began to see how being able to do that preparation was important. Now, I also learned that preparation doesn't mean memorization. It means going in and gathering information about who it is you're presenting to, who it is you're presenting on behalf of, and what kinds of information they were looking for you to provide, and then being able to provide it in a way that everyone there could understand, because they are not necessarily as well versed in some of the legal language that I was used to communicating in.
Wow. So what you're really reinforcing for us today is that communication is less so about you and you showing up as the expert and putting all this pressure on yourself versus the audience that you are presenting to, sharing information. How are they going to absorb that information? How are they going to make sense of it? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Oh, 100%. And I've also learned too about how to guide your audience through the presentation of the material. And I learned very early when I was doing legal writing that it was very important in your writing to put a roadmap, to say, okay, here are the things, here's what the question is, here's what the short answer is, and then here are the points that I'm going to make to reinforce this. And I learned you can do that as well when you are presenting information. And a lot of times what you want to do is you give a roadmap or a basic outline of the information that you want to provide, but then you also have to give space and time for people to absorb the information that you're providing, but then to also ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it's good to start with a little bit less and let them come and ask the questions, because you don't always know what information they're going to need to be able to fill in to understand your points.
Yeah. There's so many things we can dig into there. We hear people talk all the time about, I wish I had more time. I really wanted to tell them this or share this information. But that's great. You think that that's what they want to hear. But is that really that's going to land for them? Do they have the context to understand all of that information? And at some point, there's information overload, right?
Right, exactly. What we have to remember is communication's a two-way street. It's
Right.
not just about being a talking head and, doing an information dump. It's about sharing information so that the audience with whom you're sharing it, has the ability to take it in, understand it. And I think engagement in communication is really, really important, because exactly what you said, you think you know what they want to hear, but you don't in fact know it. And I do think that having an engaged conversation where you are giving and receiving information is probably a better situation for both the presenter and the people for whom the presentation is being made, because that is your ability to make sure that your message has been communicated, and to the extent that they have questions about that message, they have the opportunity to dig in or to delve further in those things that they didn't understand.
Mm-hmm. So let's switch gears a little bit. Women are telling us that they are being interrupted more often than they should be at meetings. How have you dealt with that, and what advice would you give someone in terms of addressing interruptions while they're speaking?
Yeah, I think it's hard, and like I said, what I've actually found to be more impactful is not to engage. And I'm by no means an expert on this, and I'm sure that there are other people who have done different perspectives or positions. But what I have found is that sometimes fighting for that time to speak and trying to speak over each other is not serving anyone any good. And a lot of times you sit back and you let that person go and say what they're going to say, and then you either have one of two things happen: the person who is responsible for moderating the conversation, bringing it back, but I don't see any sense of trying to engage in some kind of contest to get those ideas out, because it's the communication is not about you. It's about making sure that the audience is getting what they need. And it is helpful when you have someone who is moderating the conversation, who helps to bring it back. I've just not found it helpful to try and speak louder or on top of somebody else. And sometimes you just wait patiently, or you continue to speak at a lower decibel. And eventually people do take notice, they pause, and they begin to listen. And like I said, I don't know if that's the best approach, but that's my approach, and I found it to be more effective than trying to speak louder or get combative.
Well, if we hear that from a litigator, we better we better take that advice. And I think you're so right. What I've found is when people are interrupting, I mean, it happens to me where we are passionate about what we're talking about. Some of the ideas that are being shared sparks a thought for someone, and they just want to say something, in regard to that thought. And so it is courteous to wait for somebody to finish. But when that doesn't happen, it does not serve you to get in the middle of, this sort of combative behavior. So you show yourself as a professional when you sort of let them finish. And if there was something that they said that connected to one of your points, sort of acknowledge that and say, yeah, thank you. I'd like to continue adding to that point you made there and continue the conversation. So instead of coming at it as, these sort of combats or enemies, really just working together to come to make that point that is critical for the meeting.
Yeah, and I do think, and that's why sometimes trying to have that outline of points too, because sometimes in the course of that meeting, you are going to have people who cause the meeting to digress. Mm-hmm. But to your point, I think it's helpful when you bring it back. Yes, that is a really important point, and I do think that is something we probably should take a look at some future date. But getting back to the point where we're here today to discuss, and then you pick up and you carry on from that point. And I think a lot of it has to do too with what your role is in terms of, do you have control of the direction of the conversation? A lot of times, and I'm trying to think, most of the time I have been invited to speak, mm-hmm. or I've been asked to present. And so I leave that course correction up to the person who is moderating, or who has asked me to come speak. And they're the ones that bring the conversation back. I think there's very few occasions where I have given my role and how I found myself in a speaking venue. Most of the time, somebody else is responsible for the court correction. And I try and be polite and not combative, and then try and bring it back to where I left off in my points.
So I want to ask you so many questions. One about feedback, because that tends to be difficult for women, especially because we want to be supportive. We want to help people grow, and not, make them feel bad about themselves. So that's one. And another one, I think we'll end on that one, is the power poses we've been told about, and how true that might be coming from a lawyer. So let's start with the feedback. How should we be giving feedback to folks?
Well, I mean, I have been on both ends of that. I have been the subject of constructive feedback, and I have been then asked to share the same constructive feedback. So I will give you an example where I presented before a board for the first time and had not presented before them before. And part of the unique nature of this board was that there were more professionals on that board who were CEOs And so they were at a certain level. And in my past experience, the boards that I have worked with have not had that level of professionals on the board. And the way that I presented the information did not land in the way that I expected, because it was an audience that was unfamiliar to me. And the president for whom I was presenting this information for, she took me aside and said, and we'd prepared, and she said, "You did everything that I asked you to do, but we didn't anticipate that it would go in this direction. And the way you presented that information probably was a little bit startling." And so we talked about what I could have done differently. And it wasn't everybody that responded that way on the board, because there was about 21 people on that board. But I knew two of them that my presentation did not land the way I wanted. And I had the opportunity to take them aside, and I apologized, and I said, I'm sorry if I came off as flip, or I didn't take your concerns seriously enough. I apologize if that's the way I came off. That's not my intent. And then I had dialogue with each of them separately, and it actually improved our relationship, and it gave me a greater insight on how to work with them. And what's funny about that is I felt even less about that misstep, felt less badly about that misstep when we had invited another lawyer to come in and do the presentation. And as soon as it started going, I thought, oh my gosh, I should have told them what I had learned. And they did the exact same thing that I did. And so I had to take them aside and have the exact same conversation. So, even today, I still have moments of missteps. I appreciate the other leaders that I work with that take me aside and have a conversation about what went well, what didn't go well. And then I have the ability to attempt to fix it. And then I've also learned how to provide that constructive feedback, because I've been fortunate enough to work with people who have shown me how to do it.
And it is all about learning, right? It's about your learning, but also it's about equipping other people to do well.
Yeah.
That's really what feedback is about. Not always is the feedback good, but that's where the best learning comes from.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, and we just have to remember about constructive feedback is just, it's not negative. It's just, let me help you be even better. You did a good job, but there are some things you could have done differently that could have taken this conversation and made it even better than it was. So in part, it's about the delivery, but it's also about how you accept the information that's given to you, and you take it in the spirit in which most of the time is it's intended.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, these power poses, it really, that's just a term that's been recently introduced to us, but we know that a lot of communication is nonverbal, right?
Yeah.
And so talk to us a little bit about how important that is, and what that sort of executive presence need to look like when you're trying to communicate something.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use words that are probably sounding really worn out, but it's about being authentic, being confident, not being cocky, being human. I think that to get up and to try and be somebody you're not is never a smart way to go. You want to get up and you want to be confident and comfortable, not overly comfortable, not overly confident. And I think it's also about reading the room and being able to see cues. because different audiences are going to respond to you in different ways. It's just about being authentic, being true to yourself, being confident. And I think there's nothing wrong with smiling. And I've been told sometimes that I'm a little bit too serious. And I've also learned to moderate my tone because I've been I think it comes from being a litigator. It comes from feeling like you have to be loud and maybe argumentative, and that probably isn't the best approach for a litigator, but that's the way I see a lot of litigators do. But I don't think there's any one right or wrong answer. I really think that it's about finding it for yourself and presenting who you are with confidence, humility, and being kind and being polite. And I don't think those things are bad things. And sometimes I feel like women feel that if you are kind or polite, that somehow it's showing weakness. And I don't believe that to be the case. I don't think you have to be loud, brash, and aggressive to get people to respect you and listen to you. And that is another thing. The reason communication, in large part, I think is so important as a lawyer is it's about building trust. And trust, I think, comes from knowing that I'm as human as my clients. And sometimes I'm going to make mistakes, or sometimes I'm going to have missteps. And being able to communicate that to an audience when it happens in real time, I think can be helpful.
Wow, Lisa. You know, I didn't hear anything in there about the Superman pose and putting your feet up on the desk and your hand behind. I didn't hear any of those things. I heard being comfortable being yourself.
Absolutely.
And the one thing I've learned and I've witnessed from some of the best leaders around me is that when they're around you, this is so true because I've experienced it. They make you feel important. They make you feel like the center of the attention, not themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And and I've also heard something that I think is true too. It also, I'm not even sure what it's called, but when you mirror somebody, you assume some of the poses that they exhibit. I think sometimes is helpful, but yeah, no, going in and trying to act powerful, I think just ends up backfiring and doesn't help. And it is about drawing people in and not proving to them that you're strong or confident. It's about being comfortable in yourself and making them feel comfortable being with you and being able to engage in that dialogue.
Again, it's that thread that you started right at the top with. It's about them, not you. While executive presence is important, and so that's how you represent the organization and probably your role. But again, it is about how you're serving those that you're meant to serve, right? Those are that you're leading. And like you said, it's about building trust and connectivity with your audience.
Yes. Yep.
Wow, wonderful. I mean, look, you just taken out all of the hoopla around executive presence in just this few seconds. Awesome. So as a parting word, tell us a little bit about your encouraging words around communicating with courage and confidence.
Yeah, and then I think, it's the theme that we began at the top with. It's just about knowing and understanding that nobody's perfect, that you're going to make mistakes, and you lean into it. And sometimes even in those mistakes, you end up being able to connect more deeply with your audience. So just don't be afraid to do it. It's always continuous learning. You're always going to get better, and you just need to take cues from the people with whom you're speaking and focus on them and what they want to get out of the communication, because it's a two-way street and it's not just you providing information. You are giving somebody something that they are in need of, and you just need to watch and figure out how it is they can best receive it.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you serve? How do you best serve them, right?
Yes.
Is there a way that folks can follow you? I know you write sometimes. Can you tell us how folks can follow some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, mainly it's on LinkedIn. Um, I'm pretty well. I'm on LinkedIn, and then I do have a column in Above the Law that I publish once a month.
Okay, well, I will certainly share your LinkedIn profile so people can
Okay.
follow some of your work. Well, thank you for being with us today. We so appreciate all the learnings. And I know that our listeners will benefit so greatly from it. Thank you.
Thank you.